The antique silverware sparkled beneath the warm amber glow of the vintage chandelier in my Aunt Margaret's sprawling country home in Vermont. Her farmhouse dining room with its rustic oak table and mismatched heirloom chairs was filled with the clatter of dishes, the scent of sage stuffing, and the low hum of idle chatter. Then, the sound of glass tapping silenced the room. My cousin Brooke Langford rose with her usual theatrical flair champagne flute in one hand, butter knife in the other. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" she announced, her tone syrupy with anticipation. Her golden blonde curls shimmered under the lights, and her posture was poised, practiced, like she'd rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. "I've just received an invitation to interview with Sterling and Chase Capital." Her smile widened as a collective gasp filled the room. Even Uncle David froze mid-slice his carving knife halfway through the Thanksgiving turkey. Sterling and Chase, arguably the most coveted name in finance on the West Coast. Brooke's eyes gleamed with the pride of someone used to applause. "They're considering me for vice president of strategy," she added, flicking her wrist casually, as though it was no big deal. "They reached out to me directly, of course." Of course they did. Brooke had always been the crown jewel of the Langfords. Ivy League diploma check, top-tier internships naturally, promotions that seemed to fall from the sky, that too. Her life had always been perfectly choreographed, a parade of success she didn't hesitate to flaunt. Her words hung in the air like perfume sweet, but stifling. I didn't speak, just kept slicing my roast chicken, each movement mechanical, deliberate. At 41, I'd mastered the art of becoming invisible at family functions. But with the Langfords, silence was rarely allowed to linger. "Julia, aren't you excited?" Aunt Margaret asked, her eyes twinkling oblivious. "Now that's a real job," she added, then tossed me a glance as if remembering I existed. "Remind me, honey, what is it you do again?" I lifted my gaze, my voice steady. "I run a private equity firm." "Oh," Brooke giggled, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. "You mean that little thing you do online?" Uncle David chuckled as he passed the gravy. "Jules, you're not getting any younger. Time to settle down, think long-term. This independence phase has run its course." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from blurting out the truth. They had no idea I was finalizing a 9-figure acquisition deal, or that in less than 2 weeks the name Julia Carter would be etched in glass at the top of a skyscraper in downtown Seattle. Not yet, but they would know, and very soon. Uncle David raised his glass again, full of admiration for Brooke. Always for Brooke. I thought about the last quarterly earnings report from my firm, numbers that most publicly traded companies would kill for, and felt a quiet surge of pride. But I said nothing. "When's the interview?" I asked, keeping my voice light, conversational. "Monday morning," Brooke replied, sipping her champagne with that smug twist of her lips. "Though honestly, it's just a formality. The job's already mine." She paused for dramatic effect, then added, "The CEO personally requested to meet me." I nearly laughed out loud. I knew exactly what had prompted that meeting. Her resume had landed on my desk 2 weeks ago, forwarded by HR with a sticky note that read, "Another legacy referral. Overconfident, underqualified. Final decision is yours, Miss Carter." "Well," I said, rising from the table and folding my napkin, "best of luck, Brooke." "I've got an early meeting tomorrow." Brooke snorted. "Another Zoom call from your couch." Aunt Margaret sighed as though she pitied me. "Julia, when are you going to let this whole independent streak go? Your uncle could have gotten you into Sterling years ago." I thought of my sleek office with its glass walls and skyline views of the nameplate that read, "Julia Carter, CEO, Carter Sterling Holdings." "You're right," I said calmly, gathering my purse and coat. "Maybe it is time for a change." They thought I was giving up. They had no idea I was preparing for the grand reveal. As I drove back to my brownstone in Beacon Hill, something else they assumed I rented, I allowed my mind to drift to the past. It had been 13 years since I completed my MBA. While Brooke basked in accolades and networking mixers, I worked in silence. I built a consultancy from scratch, saved failing businesses, and learned the intricacies of acquisition. I'd used shell companies and strategic proxies to buy out Sterling and Chase 5 years ago when its founder quietly retired. But the Langfords never read the business pages. Tomorrow morning, Brooke Langford would walk into my boardroom and with all her rehearsed confidence call me ma'am. Too busy clapping for every safe, predictable milestone Brooke achieved, my family never noticed the daughter, who had quietly become one of the most influential women in American finance. Pulling into my underground garage, I glanced up at the tower that bore my company's logo, right above the office Brooke had gushed about in her cover letter. My phone buzzed. A message from Brooke. "You should swing by Sterling sometime. I'll give you the tour once they bring me on board. It's a real firm, you'll love it." I chuckled, looking up at my headquarters with amusement. The same corner office she dreamed about was mine. Upstairs, I made tea and opened her resume again. On the surface, it was impressive: top schools, steady promotions, glowing recommendations. But I'd done my homework. The fine print told a different story: mistreated interns, misattributed reports, and a habit of cutting corners dressed up as ambition. Brooke had always been a performer, but this time she'd learn I don't just read scripts, I write them. Another buzz, this time from Aunt Margaret. "Sweetheart, don't feel bad. Brooke's just had more structure. We're here to help you find something stable." I let the message sit unanswered. Instead, I walked to my home office and looked at the framed magazine covers on the wall. Fortune, Business Week, The Wall Street Journal, headlines that called me the quiet queen of capital, features that told a story no one in my family had cared to read. They never asked why I changed my last name, or how I came to own the firm they now bragged about. That night before bed, I sent one final email: schedule Ms. Brooke Langford's interview for 9 a.m. sharp. My office. Make her wait 30 minutes before bringing her in. A little theatrical irony. Tomorrow they'd see who I became while they weren't watching. If you've ever been underestimated by those who should have recognized your strength before the world did, like the video, subscribe to the channel, stay with me. Because when Brooke Langford stepped into my office that spring morning, heels clicking with the confidence of entitlement, what followed would become the most satisfying moment of my career. And not just because of the reversal, but because of everything it revealed. The city beyond the towering glass walls shimmered under a soft haze, the early sunlight brushing gold onto the skyline like a careful painter. From the polished concrete floors to the tailored lines of my navy blazer, everything in my corner suite at Sterling and Chase reflected intentional elegance. Power here didn't need to shout. It resonated in the quiet. Tasha Green, my ever-poised executive assistant, greeted me as the elevator doors slid open. Her voice was low, laced with amusement, yet respectful. "Good morning, Miss Carter. Your 9 o'clock arrived early." "How early?" I asked, glancing at the slender Cartier watch around my wrist. 8:45. Her smile widened, subtly conspiratorial. "She's been in the lobby for 20 minutes already. Told the front desk she was personally requested by the CEO." Of course she had. Brooke never missed an opportunity to perform, to drop names she barely knew and titles she hadn't earned. I set my briefcase on the rich walnut desk, slipped off my coat, and nodded toward Tasha. Let her wait another 10. "How's she handling it?" I asked casually, but not without curiosity. Tasha chuckled, pulling a folder from beneath her arm. "She's demanded 2 oat milk lattes, sent one back, bragged about knowing half the executive board, and referred to you as her confused cousin who still thinks consulting is a real job." A grin tugged at the corner of my mouth. "Has she noticed the magazine covers yet?" "She hasn't looked up once," Tasha said, shaking her head. "Too busy performing for the receptionist." Classic Brooke. Always so wrapped in image and illusion, she never bothered to look beyond the stage lighting. All around her, on the walls of that very lobby, were framed covers of Fortune, Business Week, The Wall Street Journal, each spotlighting me, my firm, my story. The empire she believed she was about to step into was already under my reign. Tasha tapped the folder gently on the desk. "I ran the full audit on her resume like you asked. Fluffed achievements, exaggerated roles, and that marketing award she keeps bragging about." I raised a brow. "Your teams, she confirmed." I wasn't surprised. It was just like the science fair project in 2005. Brooke got the trophy while I assembled the data behind the scenes. She'd been perfecting this act for decades. "Send her up at 9 sharp, I said, settling into my leather chair. "And Tasha, have security record the lobby feed. I want to keep this one for personal archives." Tasha gave a small, knowing nod before leaving. I exhaled, leaned back, and steepled my fingers. The room was quiet except for the subtle hum of the city and the ticking of my watch. At precisely 9 o'clock, the intercom buzzed. "Ms. Carter," came Tasha's voice. "Ms. Langford is here for her interview. Send her in." The door opened. Brooke strutted in with the air of someone already rehearsing their acceptance speech, heels clacking confidently, shoulders back, chin high. But then she saw me. Her steps faltered. The color drained from her face so abruptly, it was as if someone had turned down the saturation on her entire being. She blinked once, twice. "Julia," she breathed. What are you doing here?" I folded my hands calmly on the desk and gestured to the chair across from me. "Good morning, Brooke. Please have a seat." She hesitated, visibly trying to reassemble her composure like shattered glass being pushed back into place. I was told I'd be meeting with the CEO. I turned the polished brass nameplate gently toward her. "You are." Silence. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers twitched at her side. "This can't be real," she whispered. You're just a consultant. You work from your apartment." I leaned back with a measured smile. "Actually, I own this building, and 4 others like it. Sterling and Chase has been under Carter Sterling Holdings for 5 years now. My firm, my desk, my name on the acquisition contracts." I slid her resume across the table. The silence between us was thick electric. "Now," I said, tone even, "let's talk about your application." Her voice cracked. "You can't be the CEO. You're nobody." I didn't blink. "That's what you all thought, isn't it?" My voice was soft but laced with iron. Good old Jules, the afterthought, the backup plan, the girl who never quite figured it out. Did you ever once ask what kind of consulting I did? The companies I built? Or were you too busy reciting your own mediocre accolades over mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce? Brooke lowered her eyes. No. No, I echoed. You never did. I opened her folder, flipping to a page highlighted in yellow. "Let's discuss this line, single-handedly doubled department revenue." Sound accurate? She nodded too quickly. "Yes, absolutely." I studied her for a long moment. "Interesting," I said, finally pulling out a printed report. "Because your former company's overall growth last year was 30%. And according to your peers, that progress came from a junior team you initially tried to dissolve." Her face flushed deep crimson. "You've been investigating me." "I investigate all senior-level candidates. This firm upholds a certain standard." As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Tasha's voice returned through the intercom. "Miss Carter, your aunt and uncle are in the lobby. They're demanding to see you." I exhaled through my nose with the faintest smirk. "Of course they are. Send them up." Brooke shifted in her seat, eyes wide. "Julia, listen. About last night. What I said." I raised a hand. Don't offer apologies born out of fear. I'm not interested in hollow regrets offered under fluorescent lighting." She opened her mouth again, but before she could continue, the door burst open. Aunt Margaret and Uncle David swept into the room, their expressions a blend of bewilderment and simmering outrage. Julia Margaret gasped. "What is going on here? Why are you in the CEO's office?" I didn't stand. "Good morning," I said, my voice even unhurried. "I was just reviewing Brooke's application. You're welcome to join. We're currently discussing qualifications, specifically honesty and results." David's voice hardened. "Enough of this charade. You're humiliating your cousin." I rose slowly, deliberately. The weight of my presence filled the room like a tide rising without fanfare. "No, Uncle David," I said, voice steady as steel. "For once you'll listen." And with a single press of a button, the frosted glass behind me dissolved into a panoramic display. Headlines exploded onto the screen charts, financial milestones, acquisition details, industry features. My face on magazine covers, my name etched beneath every graph. Proof, legacy, reality. "Welcome," I said, gesturing toward the display, "to Sterling and Chase Capital, the firm you all brag about at dinner parties." The one Brooke applied to, eager to join. The company rebuilt, revitalized, and expanded by the woman none of you took seriously. They stared, rooted in place, chins lowered slightly, as though bracing for some unseen blow, while numbers, headlines, and magazine covers scrolled across the wall in seamless digital clarity. Fortune. The Wall Street Journal. Bloomberg. And on every single one of them, my name. Not in the bylines, not buried in footnotes, but front and center, embossed in serif and spotlighted beneath bold headlines, "Julia Carter reshapes the financial world." This can't be real," Aunt Margaret whispered, lowering herself into the nearest leather armchair with a grace born more of disbelief than poise. Her hands trembled in her lap, as if trying to grasp something no longer solid. "This is all yours." I stepped from behind the desk, the slow, deliberate rhythm of my heels carrying my voice like a drumbeat. Every line of it I said, sweeping an arm toward the data, the legacy, the mountain I'd carved stone by silent stone. "The consulting firm you laughed at over pie and coffee, that was only the foundation. While Brooke was boasting about client presentations she barely attended, I was salvaging entire companies. While you toasted her promotions, I negotiated billion-dollar takeovers from across the ocean. My uncle, who had stood unmoving like a statue of granite chipped with disdain, finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell us?" I smiled, small, restrained, but it did not reach the hollows of my eyes. "I did," I said with quiet gravity. "You just never listened." Brooke's voice cracked like glass under weight. "Julia, if we'd known—" I turned to her eyebrows, lifting in precise skepticism. "Exactly. If you had known. But you didn't ask. You didn't care. You only see worth when it wears the right label or comes in a congratulatory envelope." This was never about love, Brooke. This was about leverage. There was a silence then, deep and sharp, like the moment before thunder cracks. I returned to the console at my desk and pressed a button. The screens changed. A new video played footage from last night's dinner. Brooke's voice cut through the room like a scalpel, smug sure of itself, dripping in derision. "She can't even get a real job." "Stop," Brooke whispered, her cheeks now flushed with a color I recognized, not embarrassment, but shame. True, unfiltered shame. "Do you—" I asked, my tone sharpening like a blade being drawn. "Do you get it, Brooke? Because I've been watching you stitch your entire career out of borrowed thread-lifting lines from reports taking bows for work. You didn't do charming your way past accountability." I turned, leveling my gaze at her. "I've spoken with your former supervisors, the ones who stopped returning your calls after they caught on. The mentors whose praise you paraded at every dinner table, many of whom didn't even remember you." Margaret rose now, her hand clutching the silk scarf at her neck as though it were a lifeline. "Julia, surely we can work something out. We're family. That has to mean something." I picked up Brooke's resume, its glossy cover now as ridiculous as a child's crayon drawing. "Family," I said, turning the word over like a foreign object. "You mean like when she claimed credit for the science fair project I built, or when she told her college friends I dropped out? Instead of telling them I launched a firm, that kind of family." Brooke's voice was barely audible. I was young. "People make mistakes." "Yes," I said coldly, "we do, and now you get to live with yours." There was a gentle knock at the door. Tasha stepped in, carrying a heavy folder bound with the crisp elegance of corporate consequence. "The background report you requested, Ms. Carter." "Thank you, Tasha," I said, flipping it open, pages whispering like judgment. "Let's see. Falsified accomplishments, reported incidents of harassment, plagiarism flagged in multiple campaigns." Brooke paled, her hands folding defensively in her lap. "Those were never proven," she whispered, eyes darting nervously. Because my father paid to bury them," I finished for her. "Yes, I know. But I don't bury misconduct, Brooke. This firm runs on integrity. And that means even if you're my cousin, you're still subject to the same standards as anyone else." David stepped forward, his tone shifting abruptly to something smoother, more calculated. "Julia, maybe we should take this conversation offline. There's no need to turn this into a what I cut in. A scene, a scandal, a reckoning. You lost your right to stage manage this narrative the moment you let her sit at that table and humiliate me while you nodded along. You dismissed me for years, offered to help me find something stable, as if I were a stray project to be managed. Now you want diplomacy?" I pressed another button. The office doors opened, and in stepped Gregory Tate, my general counsel, his suit crisp, his glasses gleaming beneath the halogen lights. "Greg," I said, without looking at him, "would you kindly inform my family about the implications of submitting false credentials on an executive-level application?" Greg nodded, unfolding a sheet of legal briefing with clinical precision. "Falsifying achievements at this level," he began, "constitutes immediate disqualification from candidacy. It may also lead to legal action, especially in cases where there is defamation or theft of intellectual property." The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. Brooke's poise shattered in a blink. Her voice cracked open. "You wouldn't," she gasped. "You can't?" "Can't what I asked," turning to face her directly. "Protect the business I built from candidates who lie. Enforce the same standards on you that I do on strangers. Or are you asking for special treatment because you're family?" Margaret stepped in again, her voice soft, now unraveling. "Please, Julia, think about what this will do to our reputation." I tilted my head slightly. "You mean the reputation you built by shaming me, by mocking everything I worked for? You want grace now, but you never offered any." I turned back to Greg. "Brooke Langford's application is rejected effective immediately, and I'll be forwarding our findings to her current employer. They deserve transparency. Brooke collapsed into herself then, and for the first time in our shared lives, her tears weren't a performance. They weren't manipulatively timed or strategically summoned. They were raw, desperate. The kind of crying people do when the mask shatters and there's nothing left to hide behind. I turned to my aunt and uncle. You should reflect, I said, my voice low, but firm, on how you've treated your daughters. One you celebrated blindly while she deceived. The other you overlooked while she built something lasting. David's mouth thinned into a hard line. You're enjoying this. No, I replied. I'm doing what none of you had the spine to do, hold people accountable. I walked to the massive windows, where the city gleamed beneath the rising sun, a kingdom of glass and motion that now bore my mark. The worst part, I said softly, more to myself than to them, is that if you'd just paid attention, genuinely, you would have seen me long ago. My name has been in the press for years, but you never looked. I turned back. Now I have a board meeting to attend. Greg will see you out. Brooke, expect a formal notice in writing. Margaret tried one last time, her voice barely more than a plea. Julia, we can fix this. We're still family. I met her eyes steadily finally. We're related, but family means respect. And that's something I never received. The door closed behind them with a soft finality. Tasha re-entered a moment later, a paper cup in hand, her expression gentle. You okay? I reached for the coffee, opened a drawer, and glanced down at the faded photo of my grandfather, his arm around a younger me, his smile full of faith that required no proof. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider at my own story's table. You know what, Tasha, I said, exhaling slowly. Yeah, I really am okay. In the months that followed, the silence from the Langfords grew longer and louder. Whispers started within Brooke's firm, subtle, at first cloaked in cautious phrasing and soft-voiced inquiries. Then came the quiet but unmistakable shift. An internal audit, a discreet third-party review, managers reviewing past campaigns, colleagues recalling emails and conversations. Piece by piece, the illusion unraveled like a poorly stitched costume seams, splitting to reveal the bare threads beneath. When the announcement came, it was phrased diplomatically, as such announcements often are. Ms. Langford has chosen to explore new opportunities and will be departing the company effective immediately. But those of us who knew the undercurrent understood that the departure had not been voluntary, not really. And just like that, the golden child's shimmer dulled. The once incessant appearances of my aunt and uncle in glossy society, pages, gala circuits, and donor brunches began to fade. Invitations were rescinded, smiles cooled. Their polished image, built on curated narratives and proud declarations of Brooke's every promotion, quietly cracked beneath the truth they had worked so hard to ignore, that they had championed the wrong daughter. Meanwhile, I kept my head down. The hum of progress became my music. Sterling and Chase flourished under my guidance. I brokered new acquisitions, expanded into international markets, and seeded capital into promising startups. I mentored founders the world had overlooked, just as I had once been overlooked. Every decision was precise, every move intentional. Then the story got out. It started as a murmur, a blind item in a finance column. The anonymous woman who quietly took over one of the Pacific Northwest's most powerful firms without ever announcing herself. It rippled from there. Podcasts reached out. Profiles were requested. Panel invitations stacked like untouched holiday cards on my assistant's desk. 6 months later, I received a letter. Not a ping in my inbox, not a LinkedIn message. A real letter. Ink on thick stationery, the strokes slightly uneven, the writing of someone who hadn't written by hand in years. It was from Brooke. A quiet, unadorned apology. She'd taken a junior role, entry-level, no special title, no family intervention. For the first time, she had tasted what work meant when it wasn't smoothed by privilege. And for the first time, it seemed she understood. A few months after that, another envelope arrived. This one from Aunt Margaret. There was no sweeping apology, no grand overture, just humility. A fragile, hesitant hopefulness in her words, a request almost tentative to know me as I was not, as they had written me off to be. I keep both letters in the second drawer of my desk, nestled beside the black and white photograph of my grandfather. He's smiling in the picture arm around a 10-year-old girl with stubborn curls and a spark of something in her eyes. Belief. Not in proof, but in potential. I don't keep the letters for nostalgia. I keep them as a reminder. That success when it matters most isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. 1 year to the day after Brooke walked into my boardroom and saw me not as her cousin, but as the CEO of the firm she once belittled, I was in my office reviewing our quarterly reports. The numbers were strong, our projections stronger, the kind of growth you frame, not just file. Tasha stepped in with a fresh copy of Forbes in her hand. Thought you might want the latest issue, she said, her smile wry. Page 32. I flipped through it slowly. There it was. Julia Carter, The Power of Quiet Success. No mention of family drama. No messy headlines or salacious anecdotes. Just a story, clear-focused, unsentimental about what we'd built and the industry we were changing. My face serious, but not unkind, set against the skyline I now partly owned. I traced the edge of the page with my thumb, not for vanity, but for peace. 'Cause real success doesn't raise its voice. It just walks through the door. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, don't just carry it quietly. Subscribe and stay with me because there are more stories like mine unfolding every day, and together we can give them the voice they've always deserved.